In Lakesh, and welcome to an episode of Time Shift. I want to thank everybody out there in the listening audience that is waiting and has tuned in with us, and thank you for enduring with us some technical challenges in preparing a really great offering today, a really great show to share and help uplift and inspire all those out there who are tuning in. My name is Makua Ray. I am happy to be a co-host on this fantastic voyage into time, space, and circumstance in which we find ourselves together. I'm going to shout out my good brother, Ruben Yinas, currently in Bogota, Colombia, bringing him into the mix and giving thanks. Let's hear you, Ruben. Let's get a mic check for you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, live and direct. We are in the place to be.
Wonderful.
Let's go ahead and bring you into the mix.
In Lakesh to everyone, and happy Easter and happy Resurrection Day for all the people who are tuning in now and who are going to tune in the future.
That's right. We realize that we are doing this for the record, for the digital cosmic record. A lot of this effort, a lot of these shows, we've been talking about that quite a bit. We put in a lot of effort to do this, and sometimes it doesn't necessarily feel like anybody's paying attention. Yet and still, we know that we're planting seeds that will germinate and grow eventually in the field of consciousness. So we have to be here and do our part to help cultivate that, and we really appreciate all those out there that do like and subscribe and share and help spread the news that there are solutions that are untried. What would you say to that, brother?
Yeah, it's important always to, especially when we go through days like today with the news and the news of the week, it can be a heavy load And it's always good to focus the attention on solutions, so we don't dwell on the problems, but we find clues in those problems to really explore the solutions, and that's what we are doing here.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's our intention.
Hmm.
And we certainly welcome participation from folks out there tuning in through the digital domain. We want to invite people to get into the live chat because we, would love to have that communication there. It looks like we have somebody saying peace and blessings. We got Linda, looks like over there, checking in. Hello, world. That's right. Greetings, Linda. We look forward to bringing more interaction into our space here because really it's a co-creative experience. We're in it together. I want to acknowledge the music in the background, the groovy vibes from none other than my brother Bilal Abdul Samad, Bilal Samadhi, great high resonance artist. We invite you to check his music out, Medi Music, for your elevation from your current situation. So we hope you resonate with this high resonance. Let that ride a little bit because it feels so good. Vibes. I know, are you able to hear things over there? You're probably hearing them in a little bit of a delay, but that's all right.
Yeah. I'm muting my other stream so I don't get confused. And
yes, indeed. Well, while we're at it, we definitely encourage people to visit the website. If you're browsing around the internet, we invite you to check out 13months28days.info, where you'll find a lot of what we hope to be helpful information regarding consciousness and calendars. And we're going to get into some of that in the episode here in a few moments, and looking at the shift in times because it's quite an interesting thing. And by utilizing a harmonic lens like the 13-month 28-day calendar, the perceptions that it provides for one who's using it are very interesting. It's a very interesting perception that is created, and perceiving, again, time, space, and circumstance of not just ourselves individually, but really the planetary initiation that it does appear that we're currently undergoing.
Totally. It's really impressive the amount of events that happen in 1 week since we broadcasted the last show. And it's important also to bring back to memory that 1 year ago in Easter Sunday, we were also doing like a radio show, and we were touching on some of the ingredients and elements of that are the protagonists of this time of the year. And today we are going to be able to unpack yet another layer of what we unpacked last year. So this is a really important broadcast and a really important show for the record.
That's right. I totally agree to that. That is exactly what it is, on the cosmic record, for the record. Just making sure that the observations that we're making are recorded. Because, again, by using a natural harmonic as a lens, it creates a different field of view. And we need some new views on the planet right now, I might suggest.
Yeah, I think that it was very symbolic, everything that happened by letting these waves of emotion that transpired during this week with the events in Paris at the Notre Dame, and the events in Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, and the events today in Sri Lanka. It's really important to be able to find an elevated perspective so that we can analyze and understand the dynamics that are taking place at this time on Earth. and be able to find harmony in what could be interpreted as a very chaotic world scenario right now. A lot of geopolitical upheavals in South America and Middle East. So this is really an important time to take the pulse of the Earth. And tomorrow is the Earth Day. And the purpose of doing the show, again, for people who are tuning in and doing it right now on this special day of the Gregorian week, the Sunday, is to really be able to communicate and to put out there the new solutions that will bring us out of the crisis that we are experiencing right now, and that this week was very evident.
It's real. I was just going to say that I think when we say crisis too, we have to understand we're experiencing a crisis in consciousness. I want to get into that a little bit more, because I think that's what people need to really appreciate about the time, and what is really required right now is a shift in consciousness. When we say time shift, that's really what we're saying. We're inferring a shift in consciousness, and it's something we're all involved in, and we all experience it in our own unique ways. And the more we can communicate openly about what we're experiencing, I think the more we'll find a greater affinity with one another as we're all going through the shared initiation, as I said. And I think if we frame it as an initiation, it really, I don't know, it puts it into a perspective that our life is for more than just being a materially oriented person who consumes or lives in that sense, but is actually here to be a real expansive and beneficial presence on the planet, both within and for oneself, as well as one's loved ones and family and community, but then also on a planetary scale.
Yeah, totally. And it really was interesting to see a little girl from, I think she's from Sweden, Greta Thunberg, speaking this week after the events in Paris, speaking to the adults at the Parliament, the European Parliament, and she was making the analogy that the house is on fire. I want to act as if the house is on fire, and right now is really an initiation by fire. We started this week with fire, 2 fires, one in Jerusalem, one here, and there is beyond all the conspiratorial and religious connotations, these events have can be read at a multi-level from a multi-level perspective, and find the symbolism behind. So the purpose of this broadcast is also to go deeper into the Gnostic understanding of this time of the year, the roots of the celebrations that we are witnessing today in around the world as Easter, and be able to connect the dots, to find the relationship, to see what happened in the past that brought us here, why this time of the year has been used by or not used, but that most of the probably most sad news come usually during religious holidays because of the fanatism that we are witnessing today. It was a week of a lot of news of temples burning around the world, in the US, and so there is a religious element that needs to be right now neutralized or redeemed, transmuted, and the fire is helping us understand that symbolism as a symbol of transmutation.
That's right. That's right. I was going to maybe play a little bit of the video. I mean, people have obviously seen it the world over, But for context, as we go into this conversation, maybe it's helpful to share a little bit of the video just for the illustrative purpose of having the video. But as we recall, the last show aired basically the night before this day, when the flash fire that really spread quickly in that 850-year-old structure, causing great damage, and certainly bearing itself as a torch for the world to see, frankly. And obviously people are drawing a variety of inferences from what it may represent or mean, energetically perhaps. But there's a lot of history, as you said. There's a lot of history here. There's a lot that's being called up for review as we proceed in the initiatic process. We see that instances like this, phenomenal. I mean, we're looking at the institution in some ways that has cast some challenges all over the world. We'll say perhaps some of that is being called up energetically. Perhaps the invitation to restore the balance with the divine feminine is being called into focus, into view. There's so many interpretations, I'm sure, as I said, that people may carry with that. But we certainly, we know that that's an interesting opportunity as we kind of unpack that.
Yes. Are you able to play the video, or?
No, I've been playing it. It's just unless you're watching it on your monitor, you won't be able to really see what I'm doing over here. But I'll try to narrate as I'm doing it, so you are on the same page. But yeah, I was just running a few minutes of the video over there for people to see and just kind of have that image. It's remarkable, seeing the structure. And I think even what's more is something you were pointing out to me earlier, the purpose of certain architectural designs that we see in these buildings, these temples of greater antiquity, or even recent antiquity, as in the case of Notre Dame, which I would say, because it is less than 1,000 years old, but we do know that there's notable antiquity from far older than that as well, but we see similarities there, actually, which is interesting to note, that it's clear that the Gothic designers, the Renaissance designers, took inspiration from previous cultures, as we all do. As they say, there's nothing new under the sun. I think that statement has a lot of layers of meaning as well.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to know that today we are initiating also like a season of the year that is very important within the Catholic Church, which is the main protagonist of the events of this week. And we can see how Pentecost is really the last day of Easter. So we start today. Basically, we are starting a 50-day period of preparation for the descent of the Holy Spirit, according to this tradition. So it's a time of preparation, really, and can be read at many levels also. But it's really interesting that this year it's synchronized with the Passover, which is also it comes from the Jewish tradition. Is a Hebrew festivity, and it's synchronized on Good Friday. We enter the Passover season, which is 1 week. So we have two traditions, very old traditions, with a religious background, that are intertwined during this time of the year. and it has to do with the calendar. This is what we are basically witnessing is that the Easter has been used as the main time of the year to synchronize the calendars with. So from the perspective of the calendar reform, Easter holds the very, very important place because the entire liturgical year is calibrated around Easter. And all the reforms were done because of the deviation in the days pointing to Easter. It has to do with also with the moon, with the cycles of the moon, but because the Hebrew calendar is let's say the moon is a lunar calendar, so it's a lunisolar calendar, but the cycles or the feast of Passover is synchronized with the first full moon after the spring equinox, and the Easter week is also synchronized with the full moon after the equinox. So we are having this year a match that doesn't always happen. It only happens 15% of the time, but because it's happening this year, and because of the events that we are witnessing, and because of the intensity of the religious fanatism, it's really important also to bring back to memory that the Hebrew calendar is synchronized this year with the Islamic calendar on last September 11. So we are now deep into the year, and we are having this other level of overlay that it's a very significant. It holds a really important place within this time of the year because of the events that come, the geopolitical moves that are always come within this period. Like a lot of wars are initiated before the Easter. The last month, which was the month of March, is always used to start wars because the Roman calendar used to pay tribute to the god of war called Mars. So the usually events in March heat up, and during April we see an escalation. Usually we see an escalation of events, of flash events around the world, especially it's related with fire. And this has to do with ancient traditions, also of Babylonian religions that used to hold this time as a time of sacrifice to the gods. So we have all these overlays. The new religions with the old traditions are now playing at the same time, and it's related to the calendar, which is kind of the purpose of having this discussion, is to be able to define and really determine which are those layers of all programming that we are now transmuting.
I want to give a quick shout out in our chat room real quick. We have looks like a comment, Cafe Nomad. Thanks for putting this together. I'm sure it is the beginning of something bigger. Great start. Thank you, Cafe Nomad. And the DJ's volume is very low and hard to hear. So I hope I just did a little audio check. I'm appreciating the feedback from out there in the world. We appreciate the feedback about that. So hopefully you can hear me better now. I can also pump the volume a little bit over here just to make sure that I'm coming through clear. I hear you, Ruben, very clearly. So I think, I think it's good. Good levels. I wanted to run real quick, and as you're talking, you're speaking about the Passover, you're speaking about the intersection of these events happening at once, and that it's not something that happens every year, because the fact is the Christian calendar is a solar-based calendar, the Gregorian calendar, that is, and then the Jewish, of the Hebrew traditional calendar, the religious calendar, as well as the Islamic calendar, are based on lunar calendars, and that causes them to, in their own way, drift and move, and based on those frequencies, how frequently they happen, that they sometimes overlap. And so we're experiencing one such concentrated overlap right now. I think it's also interesting to note that according to the tradition, Jesus and his disciples, on what is referred to as Maundy Thursday, the day before Good Friday, the day of his crucifixion, was said to have gone into, I don't want to misquote this, I'm not a biblical scholar, but basically there was an observation they were giving for the Jewish Passover, which was part of the tradition of the time of the day. But then it would turn out the following day he would be essentially turned over to, to be crucified. And all that allegory, that story relates, that we see, and the impact that it has on the, how do we want to say, the collective unconscious and consciousness. There's a lot to that. But I also wanted for people's illustration to maybe play a little bit of a video that will give some perspective. We can go ahead and run a little bit of a video here, if that's all right, just to reinforce what you're sharing.
Wonderful.
How's that sound? Okay, good. Let's make that video presentable to the world, and we'll let that run a little bit. And we want to thank everybody for sticking in there with us, as you are and as you do. We appreciate, love you. And Ruben, if you don't mind, just mute yours down so we don't have the ambient noise, and we'll go ahead and run this video.
Easter, the holiest day of the Christian calendar, a celebration of Jesus Christ's resurrection from the dead. So what does this miracle have to do with a bunny delivering painted eggs? The answer lies in 100 generations of rituals and customs. According to the Gospels of the New Testament, Jesus Christ and his apostles entered Jerusalem to observe Passover, the Jewish holy season that celebrates the Hebrews' release from slavery. After the Passover supper, Jesus was arrested, and on what is now called Good Friday, he was crucified. 2 days later, he rose from the dead. Those of Jewish origin were the first to celebrate the resurrection, likely as a new facet of the Passover festival. In fact, the Easter celebration was called Pascha. It's derived from the word Pesach, the Jewish translation for Passover. Originally, Easter was celebrated 2 days after Passover, so it fell on any day of the week. But Easter Wednesday just didn't feel right. In 325 AD, Roman Emperor Constantine and the Council of Nicaea ruled that Easter must fall only on a Sunday, the day when Christ rose. Easter Sunday would be the first Sunday to follow the full moon after the spring equinox. It could occur anywhere between March 22nd and April 25th. Around this same time, Christians began one of the first recorded rituals of the modern Easter celebration.
Oh yeah, I was
There we go. I'm back.
I was muted. Yeah,
I think I was muted too.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that. I was saying, if you want to remark on that, because you'd be familiar with the video.
Yeah, I think that the most important element that we need to bring back from the video is that the Christian narrative has the Passover as a backdrop. So we were speaking about initiation. We were speaking how in the video they're saying how Jesus entered Jerusalem at the start of the week, and that was the time of the Notre Dame fire at the start of this Holy Week, which happens to be the 5th-year anniversary of an important event within the context of prophecy, which is the first blood moon of the 2014-2015 tetrad. It's a cycle of 4 consecutive eclipses that the moon turns red. And it doesn't happen very often. I think it's almost every 28 years that we have these consecutive full moon eclipses, and that they are related to biblical prophecies. So the fact that on April 15 we experienced the 5th anniversary of that event, and today we are experiencing on the other bookend of the Holy Week, we are completing 5 cycles of 260 days, which is the Mayan measure for the spiritual cycles, 260 days. We are completing 5 of those 2 days from the last lunar eclipse of that tetrad. So it is certainly very iconic to see the events that happen at the beginning and at the end of this Holy Week, considering all the prophetic overtones that this week has, and that is related to full moons. We had yesterday or the day before a pink moon, which is almost like a blood moon, but a little less intense. So even the vibration of the color tends to give us some clues on what we are experiencing right now. Yeah, and
wow.
The dog is also giving her opinion.
Hey, we're in the dog wave spell.
Yes.
We welcome the perspective of all sentient life. So yeah, with that, let's watch a little bit more of the video, and we'll come back for a little bit more commentary.
Around this same time, Christians began one of the first recorded rituals of the modern Easter celebration, the lighting of the Paschal candle, its flame a reminder of Christ's resurrection, light out of darkness. As Christianity spread throughout Europe, different pagan customs blended into the holidays. In fact, the actual word Easter may have come from Estra, the goddess of spring and fertility, which brings us to the Easter egg. Eggs have been a mythological symbol of birth for thousands of years. Christians adopted the egg as an Easter custom sometime around the 13th century. The yolk inside a shell represented Christ's emergence from the tomb. Eggs were painted red to represent the blood Christ shed on the cross. The colorful Easter egg soon hatched its own traditions. A popular one was egg rolling. In 1876, Congress prohibited kids from playing on the Capitol grounds. So, President Rutherford B. Hayes opened the White House lawn to the little rollers. After that, the White House Easter egg roll became a tradition. So when did that Easter bunny hop into the scene? The fertile rabbit had long been a symbol of new life in European pagan celebrations. Beginning around the 16th century, parents told children that if they behaved, on the eve of Easter, the Osterhaus would come and lay colorful eggs. Children built nests in their homes to entice the rabbit to visit. And so began the customs of the Easter egg hunt and the Easter basket. To help fill out those baskets, 19th century European chocolatiers began making egg-shaped chocolates. The sweet trend quickly spread throughout the world. Today, billions of dollars are spent each year on Easter candy. Easter. It's a joyful day when Christians celebrate the resurrection. For 2,000 years, customs have been added, some spiritual and some fun. But Easter is also the time for families to gather and welcome spring, when new life emerges after the dead of winter.
All right. I think that's good for some context. I think some of what's very interesting there is pointing out that the tradition we now see as Christianity has its roots, its origins in pagan traditions,
Uh-huh.
which may be a revelation for some out there, frankly, because, a lot of people don't necessarily study or research the roots or origins of the religion they may follow. A lot of people are born into it, and they kind of accept it as the rule, the social or family norm, the cultural norm that they're born into. But then there are several who do endeavor to understand the underpinnings of it, sort of the motive and what's behind it. And what I have found personally in my own quest in that way, I mean, my parents were both Presbyterian clergy. So I grew up with the exposure to the Christian liturgy and the nature of that worldview, and yet and still it wasn't fulfilling me to the degree that I felt called to know, that I felt called to discover and experience in terms of sanctity, divinity, sacred relationship with life, with the Creator. So it's interesting, though, that according to that report, it would seem that it is a religion that's comprised of several different influences, somehow put together. When we look at the high holy days of Easter, for example, and this whole period this past week, and all the other traditions woven into it, I think it's very, very interesting to point that out. We talk about the relationship not only with the intersection of the Hebrew holy days of the Passover, or even of the the Shaban in Islam. With the observation, the celebration of forgiveness, which is also coinciding at this point in time in relationship to the pink full moon. Which all of these, the compounding effect and the amplification of that is obviously, it is causing some kind of shift. Yeah. It is absolutely causing a shift. And I'd really love to hear more from folks out there to learn how they're experiencing this shift, and we can see if anybody's out there listening in. We know that some folks have come in on chat and, let us know that they're out there. But this is the kind of thing we want to certainly foster here, is how to explore what the shift is for each of us in our own ways, because we're all having a different experience of this amazing time. And some of it's informed by the mores and traditions of culture, and some of it is emergent, some of it is brand new, some of it is creative, it's in the moment. It has never yet before been expressed. And I think that that's also quite interesting about the time in which we find ourselves.
Yeah, it's important to bring back to memory the key fact number one, that the calendar is a program. So basically we tend to go through the same movies around this time of the year, and these movies combine elements of different traditions, and some of the traditions have been, like you were mentioning before, they were pagan traditions that became religious traditions, and then became a modified religious traditions. For instance, the Pentecost is really based on the Festival of Weeks of the Hebrew calendar that was celebrated also 7 weeks after Passover. So we keep seeing this theme of the completion of important cycles around this time of the year, this window. There is another flashpoint from the pagan perspective on May 1st, the start of the 5th year in the Gregorian calendar, and it's the Festival of Fire. So it's Beltane in the in the pagan tradition. So that's the it's associated with a lot of fertility rituals that start with the spring equinox, because the spring is the coming to life. We were watching in the video the rabbit.
Yes.
And I know that you have really interesting findings about the the origins of the egg and the sacredness of this symbolism.
Absolutely.
And it would be nice to hear a little bit more about it, because we explored a little bit about that last year. We mentioned also that April 1st is the festival of Veneralia, which is Venus, which is associated with the feminine too. So there is a fertility within Western culture and the Northern Hemisphere, because in the Southern Hemisphere these traditions are not so strong as they are in the old world.
Right.
But they hold resemblance, and they hold a feel for the planet also. Especially,
It's absolutely, I think what it is in many ways, it's the echo of that ancient memory that at some point in the past was made to disperse or go underground or disappear. And in some cases, those traditions were absorbed by the dominant culture and then found their expression in various ways, as we now see in contemporary Christianity, where it's the Easter egg roll and all the festivities around that and the candy and the like. But we know that that's actually very contemporary. But the image we're looking at on the screen right now is actually a depiction from a temple in Egypt. It's a depiction of a rabbit, which you can also see in the design. There's a symbol for water underneath the rabbit. And there's a description here about the Egyptian hare goddess, hare, H-A-R-E, the goddess Wenet. And it says, in many ancient civilizations, the hare is a lunar animal because the dark patches Maria sees, S-E-A-S in quotations, Maria sees, I'm not sure what it's referring to there, but Maria, Ave Maria, Mary, the ocean, maritime, the seas, etc. So because the dark patches on the surface of the full moon suggest leaping hares, in Buddhist, Celtic, Hottentot, and ancient Egyptian cultures as well, the hare was associated with the moon, known for its vigilance and for the myth of it sleeping with its eyes open. The early Christian Physiologus mentions a further peculiarity of the hare. With its shorter front legs, it can run fastest uphill, eluding its pursuers. Its speed and vigilance, according to Plutarch, have a divine quality. A trickster figure, the hare outwits larger and stronger animals. For psychologically oriented symbologists, neither the speed nor the timidity of the hare is critical, but rather the rate at which it multiplies. This makes the animal a symbol of fertility. And this is from a scholar, Biederman, and a book, The Dictionary of Symbolism. But I think that image is really telling, very interesting. And then the image next to it is a symbol of the Mayan goddess, Ixchel. Ixchel, the mother goddess, the goddess of fertility, midwifery, the jaguar goddess, the moon goddess Ixchel, also considered goddess of reason, creativity, weaving, and her totem animal, the rabbit. So I found something here that was expounding that goddess of fertility, healing, the moon, and abundant fishing, Ixchel is often depicted giving birth, holding a fish, fisher of men, loaves and fishes, Vesica Pisces, some interesting overlap there, holding a fish or in the company of a rabbit. All of these symbols represent abundance and fertility in the ancient Mayan culture. Also the goddess of water and the moon, of childbirth and weaving. She is said to have taken the sun as her lover. Now, what does that sound like? That sounds like what we see in the manifestation of the spiritual relationship people may take to the Son or to Jesus, the Son of God, and all the allegory and the levels of meaning that may have, in terms of having a relationship with God, or the God the lover, and the way that those types of expressions have been offered over the years, reflecting on that type of sacred relationship. And that it's interesting that it's the women who are anchors of the fertility, anchors of the wellness and the regeneration, the renewal of spring. And so to see the image of Notre Dame, Our Lady, on fire, you know, it's interesting because it brought attention then to the rose window.
Yeah.
That's so renowned, and roses similar to that in cathedrals and temples, you know, forever, you know, as long as we've designed or had art to depict the sacred in various cultures, we can see that there's powerful symmetry and image and beauty in the type of art as well as the architecture of these buildings. They were designed in such a way to inspire awe.
Yes.
You know, which on a level is psychological manipulation, to be clear. But at the same time, you can't help but to feel a great and even calming presence when you enter a holy space, a cathedral with a beautiful, you know, enormously high ceiling and the type of presence that it imbues, you know, when you're in that space. So I think it's interesting that the compounding effect of those echoes that still reverberate thousands of years later, you know, coming out of these pagan traditions, coming out of Egypt, finding its way through the waves of time to be expressed even now, as we see people in their own spiritual growth and evolution emerging to select consciousness that reflects the embodiment of goddess-like qualities,
Yes.
or elevated consciousness, the synchrony and the harmony of health and well-being and yoga and union of spirit and form that we see becoming more normative. It's more a normal conversation. It's not the type of taboo that it would have been 100 years ago.
Yes.
So we can see the wave, we can see the ripple of these threads that show up, that depict the mother, that depict a holy sacred relationship with the mother.
Yes.
And so I know for many, seeing Notre Dame burning, it reflected in some ways the purification, but also the harm.
Yes.
Both. I mean, it's going to mean something different to everybody perceiving the same thing, and that's all right.
Yeah. I think it's important to bring back also the cosmovision of the ancient cultures, that the application of universal principles and laws were presented in these ways, to represent the principle of as above, so below, as within, so without. So this according to researchers and scholars, the ancient cathedrals were a reflection of the human body, and all the important places or spots within the cathedral have their counterpart in the human body, in the human in the body of a woman. And in this case, the spear and the main altar, who receive basically the most amount of damage, corresponds to the belly. So it's like we are birthing
the womb.
Yeah, the womb.
In the period of fertility, when those energies would be most favorable for the womb, you know. And what is that saying in terms of why that's such a flashpoint, both for it literally being a flashpoint of something catching fire, but also catching our attention?
Yes.
And what it's causing in the psyche, the shared psyche, the shared experience. We're all witnessing it, right? So what is that actually catalyzing for us? And I think it's interesting for you to go to the description of the architecture and the intention within which these vaulted temples were made and why they were made to be so grandiose.
Yes.
You know, to evoke such a feeling, and then also a process, an initiation. As you notice in the image there, that we're looking at the various forms, many different forms of women, sacred women, and the relationship to the bunny and the fertility. And we also know from our exposure and our research that in Palenque in Chichen Itza, and I don't happen to have an image for it right now, but we'll reference it, that there is the Temple of Inscriptions, which next to that is Temple 13, Tomb of the Red Queen, so-called. And then next to that is the Fertility Temple, which was the temple of the rabbit god, according to that, or goddess for that matter, in the Mayan culture again. So we're seeing the rabbit show up in the Egyptian cosmovision in its art and architecture, you know, as depicted in artifacts and on buildings and in the art that they would project in such elegant and beautiful ways. And then we're seeing it as well in you know, in the Maya tradition. We're seeing it right there. Yeah. And we know there's a continuity. And the fact that these things do recur cyclically, we know also is attributed to the fact that a lot of these orientations were made in relationship to the recurring celestial cycles, whether it be our local moon, or it also happening to be the solar cycles or the Venus cycles, or, you know, the relationship with Sirius, for example, as we get into timekeeping and the points of orientation. So I think that all of these are really interesting notes to point. I want to shift a little bit, though, to speak a little bit more about the structure, because I think, you know, you and I got to talking previously about the concept of the triptych, the three arcs that basically we find in a lot of these types of designs, of temple design and things like this. And I was doing a little bit of digging and found some really great images that we begin to see show up, and also some really great explanation. I mean, there is an explanation through the perspective of the tarot, for example, as it relates to some of the symbolism here. And the arc symbol in tarot is always speaking to us about openings, beginning and stepping through certain perspectives to see what's on the other side. Yeah. And isn't that what the whole Christ mystery is about? If anything, is about stepping through openings, right, to see what's on the other side, or to show that there's really no separation between life and death. That's the mystery, is the resurrection and eternal life, and that initiation. The ark also means dealing with initiation and ceremonies of renewal. So stepping through such arches, gateways, openings, portals, means you're initiating new energy, new beginnings. Yes. And that's part of the ever new renewal, for example, of coming to a temple regularly and renewing oneself, walking through such vaulted arches that really create a sense of awe, as I said before. You know, one thing that is interesting, though, is there is a perspective I've heard years ago, and it just occurs to me now, that in those days there were giants, as it's even saying in the Bible. There were giants in the earth in those days. Speaking of, you know, obviously an eon ago, but the idea that perhaps these vaulted arches, you know, were a representation to, or an acknowledgement to, other beings, perhaps. Yes. I know that that's definitely an out there thought, but, you know, it does occur to me as we're thinking about the largesse with which these things have been built. And when we look at some of the temple structures throughout the Mayan culture and Egypt, ancient Kemet, we look at these structures, they're enormous. And, it makes one wonder if they step outside and think a little bit. It just makes one wonder, about the size, perhaps, of some of these original inhabitants, maybe here well before our time. There are, obviously some records archaeologically of very interesting species to have preceded, but that information doesn't really get mainstream very often. But it's certainly something to consider.
Yeah.
I wanted to.
I think it's also worth mentioning that these temples, most of these temples, they hold special alignments, like you were showing in the picture, special alignments with the solstices and equinoxes. And usually the way that they function is to have two markers for the summer solstice and the winter solstice, which are apart to each other, and one central marker for the equinoxes. So they were able to track the movements of the sun through these portals using these buildings and these structures as markers. So the application of astronomical principles to architecture it's a science that we don't hear that much today, but that for the ancient people, whether giants or of not literal giants, but at least with giant minds and giant worldview, they were able to launch these really amazing projects of architectural projects, knowing that it will take generations to finish. So we were hearing also Greta Thunberg speaking about how we need cathedral thinking. What is cathedral thinking is knowing that in order to build a temple, we will need a lot of time and generations to finish the temple. So the people who start building the temple usually don't see it finish, but the legacy of from one generation to another is also contained within these structures. So it has
interesting.
They were also built in a way that they were resonance chambers, and the vibrations or certain tones and notes will create like a very subtle healing effects. That's why we also hear a lot of stories of healing within these Notre Dame cathedrals, because they were healing chambers that were based on the harmonious division of space and the creation of geometrical shapes and colors that will evoke those experiences, which will resemble mostly like a spiritual ecstasies.
So, I think as I hear what you're saying, and I definitely find it to be interesting, I think what also comes up for me is, would all of that be an allegory for how we build up the God within fellow humanity?
Yeah.
Because ultimately, building these structures is a wonderful legacy to some, to a degree. And yet, maybe the moment of April 15th, 2019, with the burning of Notre Dame, maybe that's meant to initiate a reflection into how are we treating fellow humanity? Because the Christ consciousness, the Divine Mother, it seems to me that all of the qualities or characteristics that we've come to know them to possess is struggling to be expressed in mass. It's not a dominant conversation. There are some, let me be very clear, there are some who are in person, organically connecting with each other, heart to heart, and that's happening, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yet and still, I'm thinking about those who are the so-called least among us, and perhaps the purpose of building such edifices is moreover to be adept at actually helping uplift and architect and support the building of fellow humanity.
Yeah.
And that's the real charge. And that perhaps the architecture there, the legacy there is imbued in the DNA. Because right now we're struggling in the evolutionary track in some ways.
Yeah.
Granted, a lens of natural time also affords the perspective that we realize that there are frictional events happening while there is an acceleration happening as well. So there's conflict and there's transformation simultaneously. We know that that's a part of the shift, that's a part of the transitional time of what's referred to as galactic synchronization or the biosphere to noosphere transition. We know that there's a lot of friction, that's a part of this that we're being called to witness. And yet again, I wonder, because I mean, a lot of memes, a lot of the feedback in social media from communities who, and Catholics themselves who have the self-awareness to say, it's wonderful to put $450, $500 million into restoring this structure, right? But then what about Flint, Michigan, where children and families are toxified due to the water? And there's still abject ignoring of that particular human rights violation. What would Jesus do? That's my thought. It's like, let's be real. If we're talking about the spirit of the season, then what spirit is it that would enable the Christ mystery to be self-realized? In other words, eternal life to be assured, that if that's what the Christ is to represent. And how does that translate into how we relate as human brothers and sisters? And we see today on Easter Sunday with the egregious attacks in Sri Lanka. That's not an expression of love. I mean, unfortunately, extremists, religious extremists, through each of their own worldviews, are acting out something that just, I don't know, it's an interesting thing. It doesn't necessarily seem like that's the path to promote or follow. So it doesn't seem appropriate, but it's happening.
Yeah, I think
and it's calling our attention to something bigger, a bigger question than the structures, the buildings, and what they may have represented to antiquity. I think they have a purpose, absolutely, but I also think the initiation is far more organic and direct and immediate and adamant.
Yeah, I think the events from this week and all the triggers, because this event trigger emotions, and then the aftermath of the event is more emotions, as because these events that send shock waves around the earth and activate the field, they also bring to we need to emphasize over and over on the fact that the purpose of the natural time and the law of time is to bring the unconscious to the conscious and light those places of the human soul that are dark with the awareness of what is happening. The situation with the donations reflected the imbalance that we are witnessing on Earth. And what is this imbalance a product of? Is part of an unbalanced system. And what is this unbalanced system based on? An unbalanced calendar. So the application of architectural principles to time is something that we really need to start to emphasize more and more, because in the same way that these temples and churches and cathedrals, they hold like a resonance field, the calendar also holds a resonance field in the mind. That's why we make so much emphasis in inviting people to adopt the calendar, because it's actually infusing your mind with harmony, with a resonance that is in tune with nature. So those are the same principles that the ancients were applying to build their temples. And because of the confusion that arrived with the Tower of Babel, and the construct of many religions and many tongues, and people having different gods, we are now at a point that we need to look ourselves back in the mirror in retrospective and see all those unconscious layers that we have not addressed, that are just popping up right now, and that it's hard to find an explanation. It boggles the mind to understand why events like Sri Lanka, with so many victims and different events happening synchronized, are part of the agenda of people who cannot understand the difference between God, the concept of the divine, or because God is a very difficult word right now, but the concept of divinity, and that something, a higher principle operating throughout reality, with confusing that with an image of a God that is it's a it brings dark emotions, like we have these patriarchal figures in all religions that are basically punishers. And we, along many of the cultures of the world, there is this sense of sacrifice that has been unfortunately misinterpreted and completely take out of context during this time of the so the purpose of bringing this conversation again to the surface, to make those elements of the unconscious conscious, and in that way we are transmuting all this energy, finding always like a higher interpretation for the events that we are witnessing. It's what is allowing us to keep advancing towards a brighter future, without falling in despair.
Totally. And I mean, as we track time, it is important to look to the past, give context for the present as we prepare and co-create the future that we're here to participate with. Some interesting other finds along the lines of the structures and the buildings. There's a researcher you may be familiar with named Richard Casaro, the Madrid-based lecturer and filmmaker.
Yeah.
Have you found his information? So he basically has talked about the ancient triptych, a 3-in-1 architectural platform formed by 3 arches or doorways, with the center arch or doorway larger than the 2 flanking it. So all of them tend to have that structure, the triptych, specifically, symbolizing an enigmatic sacred science, wisdom teaching, that was once mysteriously shared by history's earliest civilizations. And so here we can see the pre-Inca and the Inca with the triptych design, and the Egyptian triptych design, specifically speaking to the ancientness of some of these structures and the continuity of how that continues to show up, and gets into the concept of the Trinity and more. He goes on to say, this sacred science is not for everyone. It endows seekers, if they've been suitably prepared, with the knowledge or gnosis and ability to see their soul inside their own body. and become illuminated by the experience of their own true immortality and eternal divinity. I think there's a lot in that interpretation that really gets very interesting. But you can imagine if one, as we were talking before about the sense that one gets entering a cathedral or a large mosque or a holy place with the vaulted ceiling and that kind of powerful presence, that if the purpose of the initiation of the triptych design for the seeker is to give them the ability, the knowing and the ability to see their soul inside their own body, that speaks to the metaphor of what the building should serve the purpose of doing, is merely a tool, a reference, but really the real reform, the real transformation is within the human soul, inside of its own physical temple. And how we tend to that, how we steward that relationship, I think is really what's being called to question largely. It's quite interesting. You know, I think one of the things that we don't talk a lot about, you're starting to hear it more, but I think particularly in the United States, something I was writing the other day as a reflection, somebody had sent me a message asking me about how to address the violence that we see happening in communities, particularly vulnerable communities, or communities that are strangled by poverty, or strangled by social injustice and inequity. And the fact that one of the outcomes of that type of situation is going to be violence among and between people who find themselves in a very similar state. And, you know, as I was contemplating that, it just occurs to me that we as a nation and in the world, we are in many ways suffering a spiritual deficit. A spiritual deficit, you know, even when we look at the enormous wealth that's amassed by capitalists, global capitalists, that's not helping balance the spiritual deficit. In fact, that's actually creating more imbalance on the scale. And yet and still, what are we going to decisively do as we become self-aware? Presuming there are some who are becoming self-aware, that can realize and rise to the invitation of such initiation as described by Casaro here, in terms of seeing their soul inside their own body, becoming illuminated by this experience. Because once that happens, one realizes there's no separation, ultimately. There's only connection. And then what does that mean to the responsibility that we have to bear with that realization? I think that that's a really interesting thing. And so one of the things I'm recommitting myself to is to really addressing that, obviously personally, because all these things do have an interpersonal relation within the person, the individual, and how that pictures itself out in the day-to-day reality. But just the consciousness to that point is what I'm bringing right now, because as we are, by nature of the ceremony, of the sanctity of this particular window in which we find ourselves the past week, as we're brought more to humility, or brought more to an awareness of spiritual reality and how the realities overlay and interact, perhaps we are inspired to look at things through fresh eyes, anew, renewed, renewal, you know, so that we can begin to get some different outcomes. Because unless we actually make some changes from the script as usual, I think we're only going to hit the wall that it does feel in many ways that we have hit, because we haven't tried a new approach. And that's also one of the reasons why we're so, you know, adamant about sharing this calendar, because we realize through our own exposure, our own experience of it, that it does cause a catalytic transformation within oneself. And so naturally we want to share that with others, that they can have their own unique experience of how that occurs, how that elevates consciousness of the individual to the planetary whole. So then instances like Sri Lanka, earlier today can be a thing of the past, really. And that's a result I mean, obviously the layers deep of conditioning, dogma, the depth of separation consciousness that has been bred through religion, sadly. We have to come to terms with that. And at the same time, if and as there is a critical mass of people who are endeavoring to decisively shift and recognize their inherent divine abilities to focus consciousness toward a new outcome, then we can impact the whole, and that's a goal, I would say.
And I think it's important to highlight that the unifying factor for harmony is the calendar. So if we are able to synchronize or harmonize with a harmonic pattern that is present in nature, we have much better chances of finding the solutions and leaving this perpetual state of chaos. We spoke at the beginning of a crisis in consciousness, and the crisis in consciousness is very close related to a crisis of the mind. And we need to remember that time is the atmosphere of the mind. So if we are breathing and living a calendar that is not a reflection of nature, is not a reflection of organic architecture, we tend to behave in an ungodly or unethical way, because the system is actually corrupt. So the intention with bringing all this up to the conscious surface is to find really a midpoint within traditions and beliefs, and agree on the single fact that the moon goes around the earth 13 times while the sun goes around the earth once. If we can reach that agreement, we will be shifting into a whole new phase of evolution for the planet that will not events like Sri Lanka actually cannot happen, because the harmony and the resonance field doesn't allow these kind of disharmonious events to surface, because we are entrained in a harmonic pattern that is much bigger than our little dramas and perceptions, beliefs, cultures, but that is part of a larger architecture, a larger system that is it's based on natural law and the natural principles that bring life. So the opportunity is here to really make that shift. We don't need to wait for the governments or the institutions to make that shift. We are applying here cathedral thinking, and we are launching this initiative for people to arrive to a natural conclusions that this is an important decision and really key aspect of evolution, which is if we want to experience a new time of peace, we need to implement a new calendar. that is in harmony with the actual order and peace that is present in nature.
That's right.
So we have an opportunity here to invite people to go and sign the petition that we have online. Every action towards this moment in time where we come to maturity and we realize that we need to change our ways, and a way of doing that in over time is changing the calendar. The better chances we have to come out of the conundrum that we are in right now.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So
I want to draw people's attention to the screen that they can see the frame of a 28-day moon or month, as we have in this particular calendar that's available. I put the link in the chat so people can feel free to download it directly. It can also be found on our website at 13months, 28days.info/free-calendar, and you'll find the current year transitional 13-month calendar there for your use. You can download it to your phone as an easy reference. It's a beautiful calendar as well. It looks really beautiful with the Turtle Time artwork that we've curated or gathered together. So please enjoy that. And there's no substitute for using it. It's very easy to use because you can draw your attention to the lower right-hand corner of any given day to find the reference of the Gregorian calendar date, so you can track where you are and interact with, people generally in the civil standard that everybody generally uses, while also making the personal effort to begin to entrain your mind to a new frequency, a new harmonic that is actually based in galactic and natural cycles. And it becomes more evident, and you begin to really feel greater synchronicity due to the synchronicity of your awareness. It actually creates more experiences of itself. So whereas the compounding effect of artificial time has its outcome, the compounding effect of using a harmonic standard also has its own outcome. And the outcome of that is greater synchronicity, greater harmony, more access to one's inherent creativity, moving in the direction of solution-oriented thinking, for example, creative solutions to conflict and problems, a different perspective that in itself is regenerative and seeks to build and transform in a good way. That this is some of a snapshot of some of the benefits. And in the next broadcast and broadcasts to follow, we will be sure to look more deeply at how to use the calendar, how to begin to really activate and train ourselves now, because we've sort of assumed and been led to use a given calendar, and it's second nature now. We don't even question it. We don't even think about it. But we're here to push the pause button a little bit and actually cause people to step back and say, maybe there is something to the fact that there's a relationship between consciousness and calendars. And maybe there is something to the fact that we go through these recurring cycles year after year, participating in particular rituals, and yet do we feel that things are improving? Do we feel that the qualities that we seek to express or embody through these various modalities or even religious views, are they a real benefit? Am I being benefited? Do I feel better? Or am I even inspired to do better? And we can look at these things and be honest. And the purpose of our show is not to discourage people from, exploring and expressing their own faith. Not at all. In fact, we're not here to talk about that. That's not our business. What a person's faith is and how they express that is entirely their own business. What we are here to do, however, is look at the fact that regardless of religion and worldview, the majority of the world's people are using, at least for business, a Gregorian standard that is not helpful, really, when we look at what help is needed. and that's why we're doing this. So we want to again encourage people to go to 13months28days.info /free-calendar to download the PDF version. Feel free to share it with friends and family. Put it out there. Also, be sure to go to our YouTube channel. If you're there now, please like and subscribe. And also click the notifications bell so that you'll know when we're posting and planning for a new show. We will be doing this show every Sunday evening moving forward, so we look forward to the consistency of that, the compounding effect of showing up and having conversations like this. We also will look forward, as we get a better handle on how to use the technology, we will look forward to welcoming guests and having greater conversations, because the purpose of Time Shift is to highlight and amplify solutions, creative perspectives, and provide useful knowledge and information. That's really the purpose of what we're doing and why we're doing this. So we do hope you do find this useful and engaging. I want to, before we wrap up here, as we've been looking at a reflection of Easter, Passover, and calendars, and as we've been talking about the compounding effect of the rituals that have been passed on, the traditions passed on generation to generation, fortified through institutions in many cases. One of the things that I think we need to help accelerate clarity around is the fact that the Christian faith, as we talked about before, itself, in some ways was a collection of pagan beliefs. It was a collection of different perspectives from worldviews, cosmologies that preceded it. And to that degree, I think it's interesting that we talk about the Passover. We talk about the liberation of the Jewish people from bondage in Egypt and what the Passover recognizes, what it's celebrating and honoring and commemorating. And I think it's really interesting that the Christ resurrection story actually finds its origins in Egypt. If we really do the research and we look into the antiquities and we begin to ask the right questions or do the right investigation, we begin to see symbolism, and we begin to see and hear and come to understand the stories that show us of that relationship. And I think it's, again, very interesting because Passover represented the liberation from Egyptian bondage, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the Christian world and its, shall we say, story, the story of Jesus the Christ, the story of, the virgin birth, all of these things find their origins in Egypt. And, I just wanted to point out a few things to that end. Here's a very interesting depiction of Mother Isis and the new baby Horus, Heru. Aset and Heru in the before. Can you see that on your screen?
Right now is a little bit behind, so
okay. We'll let it catch up.
Okay.
But I found this imagery to be quite interesting because, again, we're looking at the compounding effect. We're looking at the stories that we tell ourselves. We're looking at the fact that the roots in Christianity do come from cultures that preceded it.
Yeah.
And I think an important part of this time is that reflecting on that and actually talking about that matters.
Yeah. And it's important also to highlight that the tomorrow is Earth Day, and these traditions have been part of the history of the Earth for eons now, and it's natural that ancient civilizations would have stories, cosmovisions that are that still hold elements within the religions today. So and 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 again, in order to find that unifying factor beyond all these religions, we can have a relationship with the earth.
Yes.
We pray to gods that we don't see or can have like a conversation with, but we don't respect and hold like a sacred relationship with our planet. So you were speaking about how can we all not only find a more harmonious way to interact between humans, but also more harmonious way to interact with the entire planet. So the invitation tomorrow, Earth Day, is to really make this information resonate out there and meditate on the principles behind this idea, which is harmony, resonance, simplicity, symmetry, balance. So I think those principles are easy to integrate, and they are not divisive. They are not they don't create friction in terms that we are not competing for who has the best calendar or who has the best god or who is more worthy, but is more like what is the best way to harmonize between us and the planet. And this is really the opportunities here with the crisis that we are experiencing is a healing crisis. So it's an opportunity to really think outside the box and look for solutions that may help us, not only us but the generations ahead of us, to have to be in harmonious relationship with nature and with each other. It's very simple.
Indeed. I want to cue up a little bit of fun music video we can take it home on in a few moments. But before I do that, I also wanted to alliterate for folks when we talk about the Trinity in Christianity and the story of the resurrection, that we have to recognize that again is a story that comes out of Egypt. And it's something that, is not necessarily, it's just important to be aware of that. And I'm just queuing it up, and I'm getting a little lost here, but it's okay.
And actually, the Black Madonnas that are part of the is an important element within the Notre Dame cathedrals. Most of them have Black Madonnas. They according to researchers and scholars, it was because there is a thread that connects these traditions with the ancient Egypt and Isis.
Okay.
The actual isle upon which the Cathedral of Notre Dame was built was the name Paris comes from the original word of that sacred place, that sacred island within the river, and it has layers and layers of cultures and traditions that have seen certain places or perceive certain places because of their geographical location and their unique qualities that are meant to be amplified through these temples, huh? These vibrations, healing vibrations that interact with the ley lines.
Mm-hmm.
So, and do we have any questions on the chat room? No, there is. Okay.
Yes, indeed. Got
And
the Black Madonna right there.
questions on the.
Say it again.
No, I turn on the stream again. It's just I refresh the stream to see if you have rolling a different image.
Yeah, I just populated another image right now to alliterate the Trinity factor again,
Okay.
which is obviously central to the Christian religion, but again, giving credit to the origins of the Trinity principle and the Immaculate Conception and the resurrection,
Totally.
all of which play out in the Egyptian mysteries. And
3
people can
days.
obviously research this kind of thing online. There's plenty of information out there about it. But again, the point of making what has been otherwise unconscious conscious for people is really one of the goals here. But to point that out and to point out, as you said, that we're in a very sacred window with Earth Day tomorrow, that's obviously also very important to the origins of the contemporary calendar reform movement because of Jose Arguelles's relationship with the founding of what became Earth Day. And the fact that we can attribute to him kind of kicking that off in the field of consciousness back in 1969 with the first Whole Earth Festival in UC Davis, California. As we move through that, I wanted to point out one other image that I found to be very interesting when we look at the reference of Horus, the sun, right, of God, the horizon, the rising sun, and the halo that is depicted with Christ Jesus, also reflecting the sun disk. So very similar to Horus and the sun disk in all of the hieroglyphics and the artwork that we find in the antiquities. Then we also know, again, a concept drafted into the Christian mythos, the Christian approach, we'll say, that obviously has layers of meaning. And I think part of the reason of the purpose of making this conscious is because we're in a contemporary time where there's a lot of disparaging view, there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of omitted facts from the stories that are passed on as tradition that we have to help bring into alignment if we are to transform, because we don't want to omit important facts. That defeats the purpose of seeking truth, right? Yeah. So part of seeking truth is also recognizing that a lot of the institutions that we put our trust into have in some ways not been straight up, and it's not about blame, but it is about recognizing that we have a right to know truths that actually reflect something more than just the sort of rote ritual that we find year after year. But where can the meaning in the ritual translate beyond just the Easter holiday? Where can it translate into our day-to-day interactions as community more and more? Where can that become a new harmonic standard, for example? And so, yes, we do recognize there's a relationship with calendars and consciousness. We recognize that there are compounding effects for these rituals that are played out year after year. And yet, because there's a disconnection between the truth and the spirit of humanity from the way that humanity may be behaving toward one another, and the fact that there are institutions that also reinforce the separation and the misinformation. We have to bring all of that to the surface for people. And people can make their own decisions, obviously. They're encouraged to seek truth. But we certainly encourage people to do the research. There's plenty of information, and you can go see some of these relics for yourself, and you can see and witness the Ankh, the key of life, symbols that we see recurring and what the Ankh represents as eternal life, with the principles of the masculine and the feminine and the offspring together, and what that means for regeneration, right? For generations to come. And then the fact that part of the mystery is a recognition that there is no death. And that's an interesting thing to put out there. But as we really meditate on that, as we really bring that into focus, then we do come to understand that as consciousness, as soul, though the physical form may transition and fade away, the consciousness, that which we truly are, is everlasting. And there is a real call right now that we remember that consciousness as the earth cries out, as the earth may perhaps have signaled or had something to do with that signal of the fire at Notre Dame, April 15th, right? There is a connection in consciousness. All these things are connected. And perhaps that is a torch for us to recognize that the earth is crying out, that the earth is crying out not only on behalf of the earth itself, but really on behalf of the way humanity is treating each other. And can we transform that as a real fundamental shift?
Totally.
And that's the aspiration, prayerfully. So if you have some things you'd like to remark.
No, I think that you really encapsulated that right here. The background, the important memory is a very fragile thread right now because of all the agendas that are running, the propaganda, and discern truth from falsehood is a very important skill right now, and a way to be able to discern is what feels true and what feels not true, and I think the calendar gives us, the two calendars, the Gregorian and the 13-month 28 days, gives us like the opportunity to experience both ends of this spectrum of chronic disorder and synchronic order on the other side. So
you put that.
Yeah, the opportunity is here, and the resurrection time is symbolic of the larger resurrection that humanity is undergoing right now, especially after crossing 2012. Things have been really getting more and more intense and more accelerated. So we are making the shift conscious as we move forward in time, and having a really a more complete perspective of how what happened in the past to brought us here in the present is the map, the roadmap for the future.
Right on. Well, with that, I want to thank you for all that you do on behalf of helping make this conscious for people. The amazing graphics, the countless hours of research, stretching yourself beyond your limits to capture this information and to make it plain for people, I think is a huge sacrifice. So I definitely want to acknowledge that and thank you for that effort. It's not easy. I know it's not. But we definitely want to encourage people out there to tune in to us. As I said, we're here every Sunday with a special broadcast. Sometimes we may encounter some technical challenges like the glitching we have on the screen currently, but that's okay. We'll just roll with it as we improve this along the way. We appreciate your support and your patience with us and your understanding of the nature of our efforts and what our intention is. So thank you for your support out there in the listening audience. For the few folks that did tune in on the chat, thank you for giving us a little bit of a shout out there. We certainly appreciate you who did show up for showing up, and we anticipate that folks will get a chance to view this video presentation at their own leisure going forward. And please remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the notifications bell so that you'll know when we are going live again. And we will in the coming weeks also be doing some pop-up broadcasts as well, as we do have some wonderful opportunities where we will be presenting on the calendar information and continuing to cultivate interest and participation. And also, as we near the completion of this current 13 moon year, which is the red cosmic moon year, a year of purification. I mean, it's definitely symbolic and energetic as we see what's happened over the past 7 days and what it has been stimulating, coming on the heels of the week before to point out the flashpoint of the point of awareness to the murder of Nipsey Hussle, which brought attention to a unified field focus that definitely must have shifted the noosphere, or the shared consciousness, to quite a degree, because everybody in the black community was attentive to that as a marker of transformation and of a clarion call to our own responsibility. So I definitely wanted to acknowledge that as well as the sequence of events rolls out. Him being murdered at age 33 during the holy season, I think is certainly no coincidence, and certainly a symbol that we need to take to heart for the many levels of what that can mean. And again, these meanings are interpreted as the individual can interpret it for themselves, but as well it does reflect something of the collective and shared reality. So with that said, we're grateful to be here now. We want to send a special shout of love out to brothers and sisters community in Sri Lanka for what has occurred there. And just, know that our good energy and our prayers are with you all for healing and transformation and safety. Just really great love, big love, and peace to all our relations in Sri Lanka who've been impacted, and by the relations who were not native to Sri Lanka but were visiting from all over the world. I mean, there are hundreds of people killed today, and it's unbelievable. But we want to hold the high watch for that, and really hold that in prayer and a good space in the heart. So with that, we're going to transition and share a little music video here of a song that I helped produce several years ago to commemorate Earth Day. And as we celebrate these recurring cycles and the opportunity to honor the planet Earth upon which we live, that is sacred to us, that really requires our love and attention, hopefully you'll find inspiration in this, a song called Earth Day Every Day. And with that, we'll let this play out, but we certainly appreciate love you all over the world. Any last words there, Ruben?
No, thank you again to you for your work and your commitment to bring this information to different audiences and making always accessible the vast amount of knowledge and wisdom that you have. Thank you so much.
In Rakesh. It's my honor. Yes, and we're in it together. There's only one of us here on the planet.
Yes.
All right, y'all. So with that, enjoy this, and we will look forward to seeing you on the broadcast next time. Thank you from TimeShift, CalendarTRUTH, 13months28days.info, and here goes Earth Day Every Day.
As we walk through the land, there's so much to see. Everything's growing like you and me. Flowers blooming, trees waving in the breeze, birds way up in the sky. flying high and free. Ooh, yeah. From the mountain top, rivers flow to the plains. This is the way that life sustains. When the rain comes, nature starts to sing. Celebrating Earth is a beautiful thing. Celebrate Earth Day every day. Come on, every day. Everybody sing this song. Celebrate Earth Day every day. Every day. Everybody sing along. From the city to the farm, there's one earth we share. Come together, people from everywhere. Pachamama, Mother Gaia, she has so many names. It's from a fertile soil that everybody came. We love recycling, planting trees and going green. Driving less and biking more helps keep the air clean. Living in tune, what a joy it brings. Celebrating Earth is a beautiful thing. Celebrate Earth Day every day. Every day. Put your hands together, children. Celebrate Earth Day every day. Every day. Let's celebrate this love we build. Celebrate Earth Day every day. Every day. All around the world. Celebrate Earth Day every day. Every day. Every boy and girl. Come on. Yeah. Celebrate Earth Day every day. Every day. Everybody sing this song. Celebrate Earth Day every day. Every day. Woo. Find your part within life's song. Yeah, yeah.